Chapter 1, The Shape of Honesty. David Byers believed honesty had a shape. It wasn't loud. It didn't arrive swinging or announce itself with confrontation. Honesty, to David, was structural. It was quiet, predictable. It made sense over time, which was why he noticed when Crissy came home an hour late. The first Saturday, he didn't clock it as anything until she was already moving through the apartment, gym bag over her shoulder, cheeks flushed in that relaxed post-yoga way. David was at the kitchen counter, rinsing blueberries, wearing old sweatpants and a t-shirt he'd owned since college. "You're back late," he said mildly, not accusatory, more observational than anything. "Yeah," Crissy replied, sliding the bag down near the door. "Yoga ran long." David nodded. Classes did that sometimes. He went back to the blueberries. The second Saturday, she was later. Not dramatically 40 minutes instead of 15, but it registered. He noticed patterns the way other people noticed weather shifts. Small changes mattered more than big storms. The third Saturday, she came home smiling, hair still damp, humming slightly as she kicked off her shoes. David didn't look up right away. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah, of course." She hesitated, then added, "I grabbed lunch after class." "With who?" he asked, still neutral. "A friend from the gym." She leaned down to kiss his cheek. "It was just lunch." David smiled back, gentle and unpressured. "Okay." He didn't ask more. He didn't interrogate. He didn't need to, because what she hadn't said mattered more than what she had. She hadn't said her name, or his. David didn't obsess. Obsession distorted data. He waited a week. The following Saturday, the apartment was quiet as Crissy left for yoga. David kissed her goodbye, wished her luck in crow pose, and poured himself coffee once the door closed. Then he got dressed and drove. The gym was 10 minutes away, tucked between a nail salon and a real estate office. David parked across the street, engine off, arms folded loosely as he waited. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't angry. He was curious. The glass doors opened right on time. Crissy stepped out, gym bag slung over her shoulder, laughing. A man followed her, early 30s maybe, tall, brown hair, easy posture. They were talking like people who expected to keep talking. David watched them walk to their separate cars, load their bags, lock the doors. Then they walked together down the sidewalk toward the cafe on the corner. David exhaled once and got out of his car. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and baked sugar. Ambient jazz hummed quietly through the speakers. Crissy and the man were standing at the counter now, glancing at the menu while the waitress waited patiently. David walked over without hurry. He smiled. "Hey!" Crissy turned so fast she nearly dropped her wallet. "David!" Her face went pale and then red, like her body couldn't decide what to do with the surprise. "What are you doing here?" He pulled out the chair and sat beside her smoothly. "Having coffee." He glanced at the waitress. "Black, please." The waitress nodded slowly, eyes flicking between the three of them like she'd stumbled into a puzzle, missing a corner piece. The man frowned. David turned to him, friendly expression intact. "I'm David, Crissy's fiancé." The word landed like a dropped plate. The man blinked. "Wait, what?" Crissy stared at the table. "Oh," the man said. "Oh, man, I had no idea." She never said. David nodded once. "I figured." He glanced down at Crissy's bare left hand. "She's not wearing her ring." Crissy's fingers curled instinctively. The man stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "Dude, I would never." He shook his head, already backing away. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "It's okay," David said evenly. "I don't have a problem with you." The man didn't wait to hear more. He turned and walked out quickly, the bell over the door chiming too cheerfully for what had just happened. The waitress returned with David's coffee, paused, then set it down silently before retreating. Crissy stared at the steam rising from the cup. David waited. Finally, she spoke. "I wasn't cheating." "I know," David said. "You followed me?" "I drove," he corrected gently. Her voice wobbled. "This wasn't like that." "Then what was it?" David asked, not unkindly. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I didn't think it mattered." "That's the part that does," he said. They sat in silence for a moment. David took a sip of his coffee. It was decent, a little bitter. "I didn't lie," she said softly. David nodded. "You edited." She swallowed. "I don't control people," David continued calmly. "I watch outcomes. This didn't look like we were playing by the same rules." "What rules?" she whispered. "The ones we don't have to explain," he said. When they got home, the apartment felt different. Not hostile, just rearranged. Like furniture shifted a few inches off alignment. Crissy hovered in the kitchen doorway. "Are you ending this?" David set his keys down. He took a breath. "No," he said honestly. "But I don't trust you right now." Her breath caught. "Trust doesn't break loudly," David added. "It just stops holding weight." Outside, the day carried on like nothing had happened. Inside, the foundation had shifted, and David was already watching what would rise or fall from it. Chapter 2, Silence at Home. Silence wasn't new to the apartment. David liked quiet. He liked how it gave thoughts room to line up properly instead of bumping into each other like carts in a grocery aisle. Crissy, on the other hand, treated silence like a problem that needed solving. Music, podcasts, humming. She filled space instinctively, which was why the silence after the cafe felt so loud. They moved through the apartment like polite strangers that afternoon. David set his mug in the sink without rinsing it. Crissy wandered into the bedroom and came back with her engagement ring pinched between her fingers, twisting it around and around like it might provide instructions if she stared at it long enough. David noticed. He noticed everything. He just didn't comment on all of it. She finally spoke while he was straightening a stack of mail at the counter. "I didn't take it off because of him," she said. David didn't look up. "Okay." Her shoulders slumped a fraction. "I mean, it wasn't a signal." "Okay," he repeated evenly. "That's it?" she asked, frustration creeping in. "You're not going to say anything else?" David placed the mail down carefully, aligning the edges. "Crissy, I'm not collecting sound bites. I'm listening." "To what?" "You're not saying anything." "I said what mattered," he replied. "Everything else would just be noise." She let out a sharp breath and paced toward the window, arms folded. "You make it sound so simple, like I broke some sacred code." "Not sacred," David said. "Just agreed upon." "When did we agree I couldn't have lunch with someone from my gym?" He turned then, meeting her eyes. His expression wasn't angry. If anything, that was worse. "We agreed," he said gently, "that we wouldn't blur lines we wouldn't be comfortable explaining out loud." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. "That's not fair," she said finally. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." "I didn't say you were," David replied. "You said you don't trust me." "Yes, that is saying I did something wrong." David considered her carefully. "It's saying something didn't align. Those aren't the same thing." She laughed sharply, humorless. "You sound like a management seminar." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Crissy sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing her temples. "I feel like you're judging me without giving me a chance to explain." "I'm giving you all the space to explain," David said. "I'm just not filling it for you." Her voice softened. "Nothing happened. I like talking to him. That's it." David nodded once. "Why?" She froze. "Why him?" he asked. "Why lunches? Why not mention him by name? Why stop wearing your ring?" "I didn't stop," she said quickly. I forgot a few times." David didn't respond right away. "That's a pattern," he said quietly. Her eyes filled despite herself. "I didn't plan it." "I believe you. Then why does it feel like you're already halfway out the door?" David exhaled slowly. He sat beside her, close but not touching. "Because trust isn't a light switch," he said. "It doesn't flip back on because we both want it to." She wiped at her eyes. "So what now?" "Now," he said, "we see what comes next." "That's it?" she asked. "You just watch me?" He shook his head slightly. "I pay attention. Same as always." "That feels awful," she admitted. "Holding trust together is uncomfortable sometimes," David said. "That's why people skip it. They rely on feelings instead." She looked down at the ring in her lap. "I didn't think having someone notice me would matter." He nodded. "It usually doesn't. Until it does." Crissy's voice dropped. "I didn't feel lonely. I didn't say you were. But you're thinking it." "I'm thinking you liked being seen without being accountable," David said calmly. "Those aren't the same thing either." She stared at the floor for a long moment. "I hate that you're right." David softened. "You don't hate that I'm right. You hate that you didn't catch it first." A reluctant, watery laugh escaped her. "God, you're annoying." "I've been told," he said faintly. Dinner that night was quiet but functional. They cooked together out of habit more than comfort. David chopping vegetables, Crissy stirring sauce. Once, their elbows brushed and both stilled instinctively, then continued like nothing had happened. Afterward, they sat on opposite ends of the couch. A sitcom played reruns neither of them followed. Crissy broke the silence. "Are you going to tell anyone?" "No," David said. "Not even Mark?" David shrugged. "This isn't a group project." She studied him. "You're not punishing me." "I don't punish people," he replied. "I respond to information." "That's worse," she muttered. He smiled faintly at that. Later, as they got ready for bed, Crissy hesitated near the bathroom door. "David." "Yes. I don't want to mess this up." He met her gaze, serious and steady. "Then don't pretend it didn't matter." She nodded slowly. That night, they lay on opposite sides of the bed, not touching. The space between them wasn't hostile. It wasn't abandoned. It was observant. And David, true to form, watched. Not for promises, not for apologies, but for what came next. Chapter 3, The Rules of the Game. By Wednesday, the silence had learned new shapes. It lived in the corners of conversations. Polite, careful pauses where affection used to fall naturally. It hovered between them when they brushed past each other in the hallway. It sat with them at dinner, pulling up an invisible chair and pretending not to listen. David didn't rush it away. He'd learned early that discomfort rushed was just discomfort postponed. Crissy, however, looked like someone trying not to touch a bruise while poking it anyway. She broke first on Thursday night, standing in the doorway of his home office while he worked on his laptop. David's job allowed for flexible hours, which he took advantage of when his thoughts were busy. Numbers behaved. They either lined up or they didn't. Relationships were messy. "You're being weird," she said. David didn't look up. "Define weird." "You're calm," she said. "It feels strategic." He paused his typing and turned to face her fully, resting his forearms on the desk. "I'm not strategizing. It feels like you're waiting for something," she said. "I am." Her arms crossed tightly. "For what?" "For me to mess up again." David tilted his head slightly. "For you to show me how you handle this." "That's not fair," she snapped. "I already said nothing happened." "I believed you then," he said. "This isn't about that moment anymore." "Then what is it about?" David considered her carefully before answering. "Compatibility," Crissy scoffed. "Over coffee?" "No," he corrected. "Over judgment." Her expression shifted, irritation giving way to unease. "That's vague on purpose." "I don't like fighting in abstractions," he said quietly. "I like clear rules." "There it is," she said. "Rules. God. David, you make us sound like a contract." "Every long-term relationship is," he replied evenly. "Most people just pretend it isn't." She shook her head. "So what? Now I'm on probation?" "No," he said firmly. "You're not a child." "Then why does it feel like you're evaluating me?" "Because I always have been," he said matter-of-factly. That stopped her. He stood and moved closer, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I told you when we got engaged. I don't rush big decisions. I watch how people live inside them." She swallowed. And now, he said, "I need to understand how we define boundaries." Her voice dropped. "I thought we already had them." "So did I," David replied gently. "That's why this matters." That night they ended up talking for hours. Not arguing, talking. It was messier than either of them liked. Crissy paced, sat, stood again. David stayed mostly still, listening, asking questions that weren't traps but also weren't comfortable. "What did it feel like to not mention me?" he asked at one point. Crissy winced. "It felt simpler." David nodded. "Why?" "Because I didn't want it to shift the dynamic," she admitted. "I didn't want to be that girl." "That girl. The one who turns every interaction into a taken conversation," she said quickly. "I like being seen as me." David absorbed that. "Did you feel unseen with me?" "No," she said immediately, then hesitated. "Not really, but differently." "Differently isn't wrong," David said. "Unless it replaces something." She rubbed her arms. "I didn't think it was." Friday night, they met friends for dinner. Mark and Lena had been part of their social circle for years. Married, comfortable, the kind of couple who finished each other's sentences out of habit, not performance. Crissy normally loved that double-date energy. Tonight, it felt like a spotlight. "You two are weirdly quiet," Lena observed over appetizers. "Are you fighting?" "No," Crissy said too quickly. "We're just being mindful." Mark raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like fighting with nicer words." David smiled politely. "We're recalibrating." Lena blinked. "Over what?" "Adult things," Crissy muttered. "Laundry schedules?" Mark guessed. "Gym lunch friends," Lena said lightly. Crissy nearly choked on her drink. David set down his glass. "We're not making this a group discussion." Lena held up her hands. "Fair enough." But later, in the bathroom, Lena cornered Crissy gently. "Are you okay?" Crissy stared at her reflection. "I don't know." That scared her more than anger would have. Saturday morning came with yoga again. Crissy stood in front of the mirror, engagement ring firmly on her finger, gym bag at her feet. David leaned against the doorway, coffee in hand. "Have a good class," he said. She hesitated. "I'll be home after." He nodded. "Okay." She lingered, waiting for something. "You don't want to know who else is going?" she asked. David met her gaze. "I trust you to tell me what matters." Her chest tightened. That afternoon, she did come straight home. She set her bag down carefully, like it carried consequences. "You okay?" David asked. "Yeah," she said. "It was just yoga." He smiled faintly. "Progress doesn't announce itself." That evening, as they cooked together, Crissy finally asked the question she'd been circling. "What happens if I mess this up again?" David didn't answer immediately. He turned the burner down, then faced her. "Then we'll both have clearer information," he said. "And we'll act on it." "That's terrifying," she admitted. "It should be," he said gently. "This is the part where relationships stop being hypothetical." She looked at him, really looked at him. The steadiness, the lack of theatrics, the refusal to make promises he couldn't substantiate. "You're not punishing me," she said slowly. "No," David replied. "I'm inviting you to meet me where I actually live." Crissy nodded, the weight of it settling in. For the first time since the cafe, she understood something crucial. David wasn't testing her to see if she failed. He was showing her the rules that had always been there, and watching to see if she wanted to play the same game. Chapter 4. Acts versus Intent. Crissy Sparkman had always thought of herself as a good person. Not in the self-congratulatory way, more in the quiet assumption that she tried, that she cared, that her intentions leaned kind. She recycled. She remembered birthdays. She listened when people spoke, sometimes too much. She hadn't cheated. She hadn't lied outright. And yet, here she was, lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling fan as it chopped the darkness into manageable pieces, feeling like she'd failed a test she didn't know she was taking. David lay beside her, breathing evenly. He'd fallen asleep faster than she had, which irritated her unfairly. Not because he was unaffected, she knew better than that, but because her mind was a courtroom and the prosecution would not shut up. I didn't mean to. I didn't think it mattered. I wasn't hiding anything. Intent stacked neatly in her head like carefully labeled boxes. Acts, however, had a way of spilling. She turned onto her side and studied David in the dim glow from the streetlight outside. Even asleep, there was a steadiness to him. No frown lines. No restless twitching. His hands rested loosely, palms open, like someone who didn't brace for impact by default. That, she thought suddenly, was what scared her. David didn't dramatize reactions. He didn't slam doors or issue ultimatums. When something went wrong, he adjusted his understanding of reality and moved accordingly. Calmly, permanently if needed. She rolled onto her back again, heart thudding. The next morning, Crissy woke early and went for a walk alone. The neighborhood was quiet, dew clinging to grass and sidewalks, the air cool enough to clear her head. She passed the coffee shop on the corner, not the cafe near the gym, which now felt like a contaminated memory, and resisted the urge to check her phone. She'd already deleted the gym guy's number days ago. Not because David had asked, because she didn't want the option anymore. Halfway through her walk, she stopped, palms braced on her knees, breath fogging faintly in the air. A realization landed. Not dramatically, not with fireworks, but with the soft certainty of something clicking into place. She hadn't wanted to be chosen. She'd wanted to feel optional. Desired without obligation. Seen without context. And that realization made her chest ache. When she returned home, David was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, focused on coaxing eggs into something edible. He glanced up when she entered, expression warm but reserved, like a smile that waited for permission to fully arrive. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. She hovered by the counter, uncertain. Then, impulsively, she reached out and touched his arm. David stilled, then turned toward her. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay," she swallowed. "When I didn't mention you, it wasn't because I wanted to do something wrong." He listened. "It was because I wanted to feel uncomplicated," she continued. "And that wasn't fair to you." David's brows drew together slightly, not in anger, but thought. "Thank you for saying that. It doesn't fix it," she rushed to add. "No," he agreed, "but it clarifies it." They stood there for a long moment, the eggs quietly burning. David turned off the stove. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. Do you understand why I'm not rushing to reassurance?" She nodded slowly. "Because reassurance would skip the work." "Exactly." She exhaled, something like relief mixed with dread. "Okay." That Saturday night, they attended a small birthday gathering at a friend of a friend's apartment. Crissy almost bailed, nervous about public appearances, but David had suggested they go. If she wanted to. She did. And she didn't. The party was easy in the superficial way these things often were. Music not too loud, wine flowing, strangers performing versions of themselves that fit politely into 2-hour windows. Crissy noticed men noticing her. Nothing overt, nothing inappropriate. But she also noticed something else. Her own reflex to soften her ring hand, to angle it away. The awareness hit her like cold water. Across the room, David was deep in conversation with someone about cycling routes, gesturing calmly, engaged but not performative. He caught her looking and smiled. A small, genuine curve of his mouth that said, "I see you seeing me." She straightened unconsciously and let her ring hand rest freely at her side. Later, as they left, David handed her his jacket without being asked. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said honestly. "Just noticing things." He nodded. "That'll pass. Or get louder," she countered. "That's usually how it goes," he agreed. The following week tested her resolve in smaller, quieter ways. At the gym, people chatted, asked questions, invited her for post-class smoothies. Crissy said no politely, not fleeing, not apologizing. She went home, not because David expected it, because she had decided something. One afternoon, she surprised him at work with lunch. David blinked when he saw her in the doorway of his office kitchen, brown paper bag in hand. "Well," he said, amused, "this is new." "I'm not bribing you," she warned. "Just showing up." He accepted the bag. "I like showing up." They ate together, knees brushing, easy conversation finding its way back in cautious steps. Humor resurfaced, not forced, not frantic. Real. Still, David didn't increase affection automatically. He didn't reward behavior like a system with points. He just kept observing. That night, Crissy finally asked what had been clawing at her insides. Do you think I'm capable of real partnership? She asked quietly as they lay in bed, facing each other. David didn't hesitate. Yes. Her eyes burned. Then why does it still feel like I might lose you? Because capability isn't the same as commitment in motion, he said. And motion takes time. She swallowed hard. I don't want to perform. Good, David replied. I would notice. That earned a weak laugh. She touched his hand tentatively. This time he squeezed back. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reset. But it was contact. Chosen, not assumed. And Crissy understood now, truly understood, that trust wasn't rebuilt through declarations of intent. It was rebuilt in the unremarkable, repeatable acts that said, over and over again, this is who I am when no one is forcing me to be. Chapter 5, What Trust Actually Costs. By the time the novelty of being careful wore off, the work began. Not dramatic work. Not the kind that came with breakthroughs and declarations. The kind that hid inside repetition, inside mornings and meals and small decisions that didn't ask to be witnessed. Crissy discovered that intentionality was exhausting. Not because it was hard to know what not to do, but because it required her to ask a question she hadn't asked before. Why am I choosing this? Every invitation, every impulse to be temporarily interesting, every urge to smooth over silence with charm. She caught herself mid-motion, paused, and redirected. David noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't comment. Weeks passed. The tension didn't vanish so much as thin, like fog burning off slowly under steady light. They laughed more, slept closer. David reached for her hand instinctively again. Not every time, but often enough that it mattered. Still, something remained unspoken between them, and they both knew it. The test came on a Tuesday neither of them expected to matter. David arrived home late from work, shoulders tight, jaw set. He dropped his bag by the door and leaned his forehead briefly against the wall, eyes closed. Crissy was in the kitchen halfway through making pasta. She turned at the sound and stilled. Long day? She asked. Complicated, he replied. She didn't press. She waited. Later, while they ate, David mentioned casually, Mark and Lena invited us to a dinner thing on Saturday. Oh, Crissy said, nodding. Okay. It's a mixed group, he added. Some people I don't know. Something flickered behind her eyes. Old reflex, instantly regretted. Are there women? David looked at her then. Not sharply, not accusingly. Yes, he said simply. Crissy swallowed. Okay. That was it. No edge. No follow-up. But she felt the cost immediately. Saturday arrived with nervous energy neither of them named. Crissy chose her outfit carefully. Not provocative, not apologetic. Just hers. She watched herself in the mirror, ring catching the light. Seen without removing context, she reminded herself. At the dinner, conversation flowed easily. Crissy kept her body language open but neutral, engaged but grounded. When a man asked her what she did for work and followed up with interest that lingered a second too long, she mentioned David naturally, the way one mentions gravity, not defensively, just as fact. Across the table, David met her eyes and smiled. Not triumphant, not relieved, just present. Later, as they rode home in the quiet hum of the car, Crissy spoke. I felt it, she admitted. David kept his eyes on the road. Felt what? The pull, she said. Not to do wrong, just to be lighter, unattached for a moment. David nodded. That feeling doesn't go away because you commit. She glanced at him. Then how do you live with it? You decide what it's worth, he replied. At home, as they got ready for bed, Crissy sat on the edge of the mattress and finally said the thing she'd been afraid to say. I'm scared that no matter what I do now, you'll always be waiting for the next mistake. David paused, toothbrush in hand. He set it down slowly and faced her. I'm not waiting, he said. I'm learning. Her voice cracked. What if what you learn isn't enough? He moved closer, resting his hands lightly on her knees. Then we'll both be spared the cost of pretending. That stung. And soothed. She reached for him, and this time, he pulled her into an embrace that felt whole, not tentative. Trust, Crissy realized, wasn't something you earned back with grand gestures. It was something you paid for again and again with alignment. And alignment, she was learning, was expensive in the way that mattered. Chapter 6. The Friend from the Gym. The text came through on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced and unwelcome, like a knock at the door when you were already in pajamas. Crissy was at work, mid-spreadsheet, when her phone buzzed face down on the desk. She ignored it at first. Notifications could wait, but when it buzzed again, she frowned and flipped it over. Gym coffee guy. Hey, this is probably weird, but I wanted to explain some things. Could we talk? Her stomach dropped with the kind of clarity that only came from recognition. She stared at the screen far longer than necessary. Around her, keyboards clicked. Printer hummed. Life carried on as if nothing had just shifted. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned the phone face down again, heart pounding. Not with temptation, but with something quieter and sharper. Responsibility. That evening, Crissy came home earlier than usual. David was already there, sleeves rolled up, prepping vegetables with focused efficiency. The smell of garlic filled the kitchen. "Hey," he said easily. "Hey." She hesitated, then added, "Can we talk after dinner?" He glanced at her, not suspiciously, not guarded, just receptive. Of course. They ate with their usual rhythm, conversation gentle, familiar. David mentioned a project at work. Crissy laughed at a story about a coworker accidentally replying all to a private rant email. It almost felt normal. Almost. After the dishes were done, Crissy sat cross-legged on the couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. David stayed standing for a moment, leaning against the counter. He waited. "The guy from the gym texted me," she said. David didn't react immediately. No tightening. No sigh. He just nodded once. "Okay." He said he wanted to explain. Asked if we could talk. David crossed the room and sat across from her, forearms resting on his knees. "What do you want to do?" "I told you," she said quietly. He met her eyes, something warm and approving flickering there despite himself. "That tells me something." Her shoulders slumped a fraction, tension easing. "I didn't answer." "Is that all?" he asked. She shook her head. "I wanted to, for half a second. Not because I missed him, because I hate unresolved things." David nodded thoughtfully. "Conflict avoidant. Closure addicted," she corrected ruefully. "But I didn't." "What tipped it?" he asked. Crissy mulled that over. "I realized that the explanation wouldn't be for clarity. It would be for comfort." David considered that carefully. "That's a good distinction." She exhaled. "I deleted the message." Another nod. Slower this time. "Thank you for telling me. I didn't want to hide it," she said. "Even though this part feels exposing." "Transparency usually does," David replied. "That's how you know it's doing work." She smiled faintly. "You make it sound so procedural." "It is," he said with a hint of amusement. "Trust doesn't respond to speeches. It responds to consistency." The next morning, consistency was tested again. Crissy ran into him at the gym. She came out of the locker room early, still adjusting her bag strap when she saw him by the water fountain. For a split second, instinct kicked in, the old reflex to freeze or flee. But she didn't. He noticed her and hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. "Hey," he said cautiously. "Hi," she replied evenly. I texted you," he said. "I just wanted to." "I know," Crissy interrupted gently but firmly. "And I'm not comfortable continuing this conversation." He blinked. "Oh, I'm engaged," she said, touching her ring without dramatics. "And this crossed a line for me." He flushed, embarrassment softening his posture. "I didn't mean." "I know," she said honestly. "But meaning well doesn't undo boundaries." He nodded quickly. "Right. I'm sorry." "Thank you," she replied. She walked out of the gym with her head high, not because she'd won, but because she'd chosen alignment over relief. That night, when she told David what happened, he listened without interruption. "You didn't have to handle it alone," he said when she finished. "I know," she replied. "But I wanted to show myself that I could." A smile tugged at his mouth. "That counts." The full impact of his response didn't land until later, when they were brushing their teeth side by side and David casually said, "I'm proud of you." She froze mid-spit. "You don't say that lightly," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't." Over the next few days, David changed, not dramatically, not performatively. Just enough for Crissy to notice. He reached for her more often. Let silences rest without caution. One evening, he pulled her close without hesitating, mouth warm against her temple. Still, he didn't declare trust restored. Crissy didn't ask him to. Instead, life gave them one more opportunity to see what they'd learned. They ran into the gym guy again, this time at a cafe near their apartment. He spotted Crissy first, then noticed David beside her. Color drained from his face. Crissy tensed instinctively, then relaxed as David slid his hand into hers naturally. The man nodded awkwardly and started to turn away. "Hey," David called. Not aggressive, not confrontational. The man stopped. "I just wanted to say," David continued calmly, "I appreciate how you handled things after. That mattered." The guy blinked, startled. Thanks. I really didn't want to cause any problems." David smiled faintly. "I know." The man left. Crissy stared at David in disbelief. "You didn't have to do that," she said once they sat. "I wanted to," he replied. "This isn't about territory. It's about clarity." Her voice softened. "That surprised me." David shrugged lightly. "I'm not threatened by competition that requires secrecy. If I lose something, I want it to be honestly." She squeezed his hand, emotion pressing up behind her eyes. Later that night, curled against him, Crissy said the thing that had been growing quietly inside her. "I used to think trust was about not being tempted." David shifted slightly to face her. "And now, I think it's about what you do with temptation," she said. "And who you bring it home to." His expression gentled. "That's closer." She rested her head against his chest and let herself be held. Not cautiously, not nervously. For the first time since the cafe weeks ago, David didn't feel like he was monitoring behavior. He felt like he was witnessing a pattern settle. And that, he knew, was the only thing that ever lasted. Chapter 7. Patterns don't lie. By the time spring gave way to early summer, their life together had settled into a new rhythm, one neither of them commented on out loud. They woke earlier now, often at the same time. Crissy started making coffee before David asked. David stopped checking his phone first thing in the morning, choosing instead to linger in bed with her, one arm draped comfortably across her waist. Their conversations regained ease but not carelessness. Jokes landed again. Teasing returned. But underneath it all ran a quiet, steady awareness, like both of them had learned the weight limits of a bridge and were no longer running across it just to see if it would sway. David noticed the change most clearly in what he didn't feel. He didn't feel the need to track Saturdays anymore. He didn't wonder who she was texting when her phone buzzed. He didn't replay moments searching for hidden meanings. The mental bookkeeping had faded, not because he'd forced forgiveness but because the data had changed. Patterns, after all, were cumulative. One evening, they cooked dinner together, music playing softly from David's phone. Crissy danced around the kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, dramatic and offbeat. David shook his head, amused. "You're absolutely not on rhythm," he said. "I'm on emotion," she countered. "It's different." He laughed, leaning against the counter. For a moment, watching her move so freely, David felt something uncoil inside his chest, something he hadn't realized was still braced. Crissy noticed his expression and slowed. "What?" "Nothing," he said. Then, reconsidering, he added, "Something, actually." Her smile softened. "Tell me." "You seem settled," he said. "Not careful. Just aligned." She considered that. "I feel quieter." "That's not what people usually aim for," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I don't feel smaller. Just less split." He nodded, understanding. A week later, his mother called. David groaned good-naturedly when he saw her name on the screen. "This is either about you wanting grandchildren or your neighbor stealing your recycling bin again." Crissy smiled from the couch. "Or both," David answered. "Hi, Mom." The conversation was familiar. Updates, gentle prodding, veiled questions about wedding plans. Crissy pretended not to listen, though every word carried weight. "So," his mother said brightly, "have you set a date yet?" David glanced at Crissy, who was watching him now, quiet but attentive. "Not yet," he said. "We're still living first." There was a pause on the line. "Living. Paying attention," David clarified. "Making sure we're building something solid." Another pause, longer this time. "That sounds thoughtful," his mother said finally. Crissy exhaled after the call ended. "She didn't hate that?" "She'll save her judgment for later," David said dryly. Then, more seriously, "How'd it feel, hearing me say that?" Crissy searched herself. "Scary, but right." That night, lying side by side, she turned to him. "Can I ask you something you might not want to answer?" "You can ask," David said. "I don't promise comfort." She smiled faintly. "Have you ever come close to leaving?" David was still for a moment, not withdrawing, just honest. "Yes," he said. Her throat tightened. "When?" "After the cafe," he said plainly. "Not because of what you did. Because of what I didn't know yet." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "And now?" she asked quietly. "And now," he continued, "I see consistency where there was uncertainty. I see self-correction without surveillance. That matters." Her eyes filled despite herself. "You don't say things unless they're true. That's the idea." On Saturday morning, Crissy went to yoga again. David stayed home, tinkering with a shelf that had needed fixing for months. The apartment was quiet, peaceful. No watchful waiting. No underlying tension. When Crissy returned, she set her bag down and leaned into the doorway where David was kneeling with screws spread out beside him. "You hungry?" she asked. "Always," he replied. "Did you want lunch out or in?" She smiled. "In. With you." Simple. Unloaded. As they ate later, David realized something important and mildly surprising. He wasn't relieved anymore. Relief implied escape from threat. What he felt now was confidence born of repetition. Trust hadn't returned all at once. It had arrived incrementally, almost invisibly, stacking up in ordinary moments until it held weight again. Crissy studied him thoughtfully. "You're different lately." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" She shook her head. "No. Just present in a new way." David smiled. "That's probably accurate." She reached across the table, threading her fingers through his. He squeezed back easily, not measured, not provisional. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in warm gold, David said something he hadn't planned on saying. "You know," he began casually, "I think what convinced me wasn't the big stuff." Crissy turned toward him. "It wasn't." "No," he said. "It was the boring consistency. The way you stopped performing and just started choosing." She laughed softly. "That doesn't sound very romantic." "It's the most romantic thing I know," David replied. Crissy leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I spent so long thinking love was about being wanted. And now I think it's about being known, she said. Even when it's inconvenient. David wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. Patterns don't lie, he murmured. She smiled against his chest. I'm glad you wait long enough to see them. For the first time since they'd started their year of honesty, the future didn't feel like a question mark hovering between them. It felt like a path, still unwritten, still unwalked, but clearly visible, steady underfoot. And David, watching not for perfection but for truth, finally felt certain of one thing. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be built on hope alone. It would be built on what endured. Chapter 8, The Year of Honesty. They never officially named it, but somewhere in the middle of June, the Year of Honesty became real. Not as a declaration. Neither of them were the banner-hanging type, but as a shared understanding that the engagement wasn't a countdown anymore. It was a practice. David felt the shift the morning Crissy rearranged the bookshelf. It was a small thing, innocent even, but she'd done it without asking, without hesitation, without that faint edge of "is this okay?" that had hovered for weeks. He came out of the bedroom and stopped short. You reorganized, he said. Crissy glanced up from kneeling on the floor, book balanced against her knee. Yeah, chronological fiction wasn't doing it for me anymore. David scanned the shelves, thought for a moment. Genre grouping makes more sense anyway. She smiled, relieved but not braced. I thought so too. That was how it went now. Decisions weren't performances. They were shared space negotiations, messy sometimes, but honest by default. The big conversation happened a week later, unplanned, on a Tuesday night that smelled like rain. They were on the couch, feet tangled, a half-watched documentary playing quietly when Crissy muted the TV and turned to him with intent in her eyes. I need to ask you something, she said. David set his glass down. Okay. Are we engaged the way other people are engaged? She asked carefully. He considered the phrasing. Define other people. The kind where you're already certain, she said. Where the ring means the rest is automatic. David didn't answer immediately. He watched her fidget with the seam of the cushion, noticed how open her posture was, no defensiveness, no bracing. No, he said finally. We're engaged the way we are. She nodded slowly. Meaning? Meaning we're choosing scrutiny over assumptions, he said. Longevity over illusion. I didn't give you a ring because I was done paying attention. Her lips curved faintly. That's not what's in the commercials. I skipped them, David replied dryly. She laughed, then sobered. Sometimes I worry people think something's wrong with us. No date, no venue, no Pinterest board. Do you think something's wrong? He asked. Crissy shook her head. No, I actually think this is the healthiest I've ever been in a relationship. David smiled, this time fully. Same. July brought heat and social pressure in equal measure. At a friend's barbecue, someone inevitably asked, So when's the wedding? Crissy met David's eyes before answering. He shrugged slightly, ceding the lead. We don't know yet, she said calmly. We're not rushing. The friend blinked. Isn't that weird? Crissy smiled politely. Only if you think the ceremony is the relationship. David watched the exchange with quiet pride, not because of what she said, but how naturally it came. No apology, no over-explanation. That night, back home, David stretched out beside her and said, That was well handled. She grinned. I learned from the best. He raised an eyebrow. I don't remember giving a seminar. You live one, she teased. August tested them in a different way. David was offered a short-term assignment in another city, 3 months, good money, good exposure. The kind of thing that would have once been a straightforward yes. They talked about it over dinner, pros and cons laid out without urgency. How do you feel about distance? David asked. I think we could handle it, Crissy said after thought. But I don't want us to treat it like a test. Agreed, he said. It's just information. He turned it down. Not impulsively, not romantically, simply deciding that optional separation didn't fit the stage they were in. Crissy didn't make a big deal of it. But later, lying together in the dark, she said quietly, Thank you for choosing us without making it a sacrifice. He pressed his lips to her hair. I didn't lose anything. September came with routine and promise. They argued once, really argued, over something dumb and domestic, voices raised, lines crossed. It ended with both of them sitting on opposite ends of the couch, adrenaline ebbing into quiet embarrassment. Crissy broke first. That sucked. Yes, David agreed. I don't want to be right more than I want to be partnered, she said. David studied her. I don't want silence more than I want resolution. They talked it through. Not spectacularly. Not perfectly. But completely. That's when David realized something else had changed. He wasn't watching anymore. He was participating again without reserve. By October, the Year of Honesty had developed its own landmarks, patterns of check-ins, shared jokes about how dramatic they'd both been, a mutual understanding that trust wasn't fragile anymore. It was flexible. David proposed again in November. Not with a ring, she already had that, but with intention. They were sitting at the small table by the window, first snowfall dusting the street outside, when he said, "I'm ready to start planning if you are." Crissy went still. "Planning? Planning. The wedding," he clarified, smiling. Her eyes filled immediately. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said simply. "I wanted to wait until readiness showed itself without pressure." She reached across the table and took his hands. "It has. I feel it too." They set a date, not rushed, not symbolic, just realistic. Spring, next year. As winter settled in, David caught himself doing something new. Remembering the cafe didn't hurt anymore. It didn't replay. It didn't instruct. It simply existed as the moment where honesty stopped being a theory and became a practice they chose every day after. One night, months later, curled together on the couch, Crissy asked him, "Did you ever regret not leaving back then?" David thought carefully. "No. Why not?" "Because if I had," he said, "I would have missed watching you choose alignment when no one was forcing you to." She smiled softly. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I," he said. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the future felt solid, not flawless, not guaranteed, but built on something dependable. Love, yes, but also truth. And that, David knew, was something worth committing to for real this time.